Welcome to the opening ceremony of the 27th annual session of Turkish International Model United Nations. My name is Ceren Dolay, and I have the honor of serving as the President of General Assembly this year. We will begin with our school director, Dr. Peter Coles's opening speech. Dr. Coles, you have the floor.
Welcome to the TIMUN conference from Üsküdar American Academy in Istanbul, Turkey. Our 2020 conference is online, and hopefully this is the first and the last time. I'd like to begin by thanking our Secretary General, Kamil Özkan, for all of his amazing work. I'd also like to thank the organising team, who we like to call the Secretariat. Of great importance are also our advising teachers, who are Mrs. Akurek, Miss Jacobson, and Dr. Butterworth. So, without further ado, I officially yield the floor to the PGA. Have a wonderful conference, everybody. And in these difficult times, most of all, have fun. Thank you all so much.
Thank you for your speech, Dr. Coles. It is now my pleasure to invite our MUN Director, Susan Akurek, to the stage. Mrs. Akurek, you have the floor.
Good morning. Welcome to TIMUN. What a year it has been. It's been 15 months since our last conference, and we're sad not to be able to greet you in person, both our regular schools and those who are joining us for the first time. During the pandemic, it has been tempting to focus on what we cannot do, on the restrictions in front of us, thinking about the changes that we've had to make to our regular lives. But I encourage you to think about the things, the skills that you have learned, that you have acquired, the flexibility, the adaptability, the resilience that you have to the constant changes, the constant challenges, the constant expectations of you. These are skills that we usually acquire later in life, and I think you should be encouraged by the fact you already have these skills. You've already proven your willingness in the fact that you are spending your free time to join us here in the debates at TIMUN. I'm wishing you fruitful debates, and I hope that you really enjoy the conference this year, even though we are online. And I wish you good luck throughout the conference. I yield the floor to the PGA.
Thank you, Mrs. Akurek. We will now proceed with our keynote speaker, Dr. Karabekir Akkoyunlu's speech. Dr. Akkoyunlu is a research associate of the Center for Southeast European Studies, University of Graz, Austria, and a visiting researcher at the National School of Public Administration, ENAP, in Brazil. He completed his PhD in comparative politics at the London School of Economics, where his research focused on socio-political change in Turkey and Iran. He studied Persian at Isfahan University and taught courses on Middle East politics and theories of democracy and democratization at the London School of Economics and Political Science. Between 2011 and 2012, he was a research associate at the Southeast European Studies at Oxford. Before entering academia, he worked as a political analyst in London and as an English teacher in Yogyakarta, Indonesia. He holds a Bachelor of Arts in History and International Relations from Brown University and a Master of Philosophy in International Relations from the University of Cambridge. Dr. Akkoyunlu, you now have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. It's a privilege and pleasure to be delivering this year's keynote address at the Turkish International Model United Nations Conference. For me, this has also additional personal meaning. Even though it still feels like yesterday, I was the president of the General Assembly exactly 20 years ago, in 2001. Since then, I've followed TIMUN go from strength to strength every year and establish itself as one of the most successful and respected MUN conferences internationally. This year, as we all know, the challenges facing both the organizers and the participants have been extraordinary. So I commend and applaud first the organizing committee, and then all the participants for your dedication and perseverance in keeping this tradition going despite the difficult times we live in. Of course, those difficulties and the reasons why we're currently sitting at home in front of our computer screens instead of gathering at the auditorium of Üsküdar American Academy are also the central themes of this year's conference. We tend to think about the pandemic as some sort of a bad dream from which soon enough we will wake up and go back to our normal lives as we knew and enjoyed before. And yes, it's true, this pandemic will be over. Sooner or later, all pandemics in history have ended. But if we continue to think of our current crisis as something external and temporary that has happened to us, like an alien invasion, instead of the long-term natural outcome of the things we humans, via our socioeconomic structures and political institutions, have caused, I'm pretty sure what we're going through right now will be just a small sample of the new normal that will define our future. It's easy to label COVID-19 as the Chinese virus and blame it on strange people eating exotic animals. But what about our collective role in supporting unsustainable farming practices that push the boundaries of human activity into previously undisturbed ecosystems? Epidemiologists have been warning for years that these activities, these practices, are increasing the risk of human infections of animal origin. Have we listened to them? Are we listening to them now? Even as I speak, in the country where I live, in Brazil, massive swathes of the Amazon forests are being destroyed to make space for farming, grazing, and mining interests. The implications of this destruction are deadly for the indigenous populations of the Amazon, who are facing yet another genocide in the hands of disease-carrying white men purportedly bringing civilization centuries after the arrival of first European colonialists. But they're also existential for the rest of us, who depend on the rainforests as our source of oxygen and life. The pandemic's greatest effect, its impact, has been to expose and exacerbate the real disease of our times, the disease of systemic inequality, both within our nations and between them. It's exposed the brutal divide between those who can socially distance, work from home, access quality healthcare, and afford nutritious foods, and all the rest who don't have those luxuries. Is it a coincidence that protests for racial equality and justice have erupted in countries like the United States and Brazil when the pandemic has been killing African Americans and Afro-Brazilians at rates 4, 5, 6 times higher than those affecting white Americans and white Brazilians? We've achieved astonishing success in producing effective vaccines in such a short period of time. Yet while some wealthy nations have already stocked up enough reserves to protect their populations 2, 3 times over and are going full speed with their vaccination programs, according to the UN, many of the poorer countries will not have enough shots to cover their populations well until 2024. What this effectively means is the potential emergence of a global apartheid regime, where the disease-ridden people of the global south will be segregated from the healthy and wealthy parts of the world. And in that dystopian scenario lies the dilemma of our predicament. We have the means, the tools, the knowledge, the resources to address and resolve all our major problems today. We can produce and effectively distribute vaccines to all over the world. We can eliminate hunger, poverty, extreme inequality. And even though it might be too late now to stop it altogether, we can still avert the worst of the climate crisis and stem the flow of migrants and refugees. But all of that requires a radical rethinking of our priorities. It requires us to realize that we, as individuals, as nations, and as humanity, do not exist in a vacuum, isolated from the world around us, but rather in a state of fragile interdependence. That sounds great, but what does that mean in practical terms? What should we do? Should we shun the fruits of technology and globalization and strive to return to an imaginary past of harmonious coexistence with nature? No, I believe that is neither possible nor desirable. Globalization is not something we can simply wish away. In many ways, it's here to stay. But nor is it our unavoidable destiny, at least not in its current form. We should remember that the latest version of globalization, which has dominated the world for the past 4 decades, as some call it financial globalization, is the product of our institutional decisions and political actions. It is our creation. And so it is up to our institutions and our politics to rethink and redesign globalization. So perhaps instead of arguing whether we're for or against globalization, we should be asking what kind of globalization we want and we need. What are the values and goals we would like to see prioritized? The globalization of what? The answers you will give to these questions will inform your positions in the debates that you will take part in over the next few days. Of course, there are also other pressing questions that will require your attention. For instance, how do we reconcile the principle of national sovereignty with international governance at a time of truly globalized crises? How do we resist the temptations of authoritarianism and make democracy responsive to our needs when our crises seem to call for, more than ever, efficient decision-making and coordination, technical expertise, and mass compliance? Never before the issues taken up at the Model United Nations Conference touched the lives of every single participant so directly and so profoundly. That makes this year's conference less of a simulation and more of a real-world attempt to address and tackle the urgent challenges confronting all of us right now. I encourage you all to rise to the urgency and significance of the occasion. I wish you a fruitful conference. Thank you for your attention, and I yield the floor to the President of the General Assembly.
Dr. Akkoyunlu, thank you for your enlightening speech. It is now my pleasure to invite our Mr. Secretary General Kamil Özkan to the podium to deliver his opening speech. Mr. Secretary General, you have the floor.
Honorable Madam President of the General Assembly, dear participants, it is a great honor to welcome you to the Turkish International Model United Nations with the theme of crisis and global governance. 2020 was a year like no other. It was for the first time that this generation, our generation, faced a threat which continues to affect us all. COVID-19 swept through the world and our daily lives seemed to come to an abrupt halt. As of the recording of this video, 2.43 million lives have been lost due to this pandemic. We all know people who've battled this virus. Our thoughts today are with those who've lost their lives and the first responders who continue to fight this pandemic. This crisis has revealed flaws about our current societal structure. The failings of globalization have come to light and forced us to question whether it supports the needs of our society. The global governance system was ill-prepared to manage this crisis, calling into question the preparedness of our institutions for the next imminent threat. This is why we, as the future inheritors of our society, gathered via Zoom at this conference to discuss our future, the crises we are currently facing, and the changes we need to make so that we're ready for the next global crisis. There will undoubtedly be another global crisis. It is, however, up to us to either follow the footsteps of our predecessors or fundamentally change our society's approach to key issues. I look forward to what my generation will come up with as for the solutions for the issues of today and the future. Thank you. I yield the floor to the President of the General Assembly.
We would like to thank you for your speech, Mr. Secretary General. I hereby declare the 27th annual session of Turkish International Model United Nations open.